Hello. We're going to be talking about elections and campaigning for this little discussion. The midterm election for 2022 is right around the corner. So this is just going to be like a little educational, but also a little bit more contemporary discussion on elections. In political science, there's a lot of studies and scholarship looking at the efficacy, the influence, and the importance of elections. When you live in a democracy, elections are kind of the most vital mechanism that you have to keeping your democracy together and stable. One could argue that maybe rule of law or a strong judiciary are also important, and they are, but today we're talking about elections. So elections bring about popular sovereignty. The people that make up your government, whether it be candidates or incumbents alike, they come to you, the people that they will be representing, for your votes. If a politician is not jiving well with the general public, then they probably aren't going to be that viable in the electorate as a candidate. For a candidate, electability is a pretty big deal. Electability is a very important quality that a candidate can exude on the campaign trail because without the belief that a politician will represent you in the way that you either want to be represented or intend to be represented, there isn't much of a trusting relationship to build, like an electoral rapport between the elected official and the constituency, the people who will be voting for them. So with this, trust is definitely a very big deal within elections. How exactly do we build a government system on trust? You have to trust that someone is telling the truth, that someone is politically competent in order to enact the stuff that you want in your government that you pay taxes to. And if you have been paying attention for the last few, centuries, politicians don't usually have the clearest records of, trustworthiness. So in order to, you know, theoretically drive the car of democracy safely, we need to make sure that we have certain functions that are in place that let us keep it running smoothly and the way that we want it to run. Um, Obviously, this is where elections come in. The parts of the car of democracy that aren't running right or need to be replaced, we should be able to swap them out for another piece that hopefully works better for you or is representative of your goals. Um, Elections are mechanisms of also accountability, democratic accountability to be precise. They are seen in democratic governments. We elect officials, we elect leaders in order to not only lead us but represent us, whether it be in our cities, our counties, our states, on the world stage as a country. Um, so we trust the people that we elect into the office. Again, theoretically, but we can always keep them accountable with the help of an election. Elections are inevitable and absolute, one would hope. If you don't swap out the parts that you need, uh, if you don't swap out the parts that kind of like need replacing within, a car, and you're doing 80 on the 405, and suddenly, there's no brakes or the brakes aren't doing what they said that they would 3 years ago, or they're making some weird sound that you don't really like, then, you probably should have voted for new brakes that will actually work to your best interest. Same vein as how elections work. You need to make sure that you are electing the people that will best represent you. So think of democracy as a car that needs to be serviced every year. A functioning democracy needs to have elections on a semi-frequent basis, whether that be, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, however long a term is. And we need to do it just to make sure that our government is working for us. We can't have people who are, in government for excessive amounts of time with no sort of accountability to show, like, oh, yes, you are still the people's favorite to represent them. So now let's look at a particular type of election that is happening very, very soon, a midterm election. Every 2 years, about one-third of the Senate and the entire House of Representatives of the United States go through elections, either to get elected or get re-elected to office. Various other state and local level elections happen at the same time. These all encompass the midterm elections because they happen biannually, and they do not coincide with a presidential election, which is the general. They are typically in the middle of a presidential term. Currently, we're in the middle of President Joe Biden's term. So midterms are typically really pivotal because they determine the efficacy of the rest of the president's term. In 2008, Obama was the president-elect with a solidly Democratic House and Senate, called a Democratic trifecta. When a Republican does it, it's a Republican trifecta. So just 2 years later, the 63 Republicans that picked up seats in the House and the 6 seats in the Senate that flipped to Republican severely affected the policy of the second half of Obama's term, his first term to be exact. Donald Trump would have never gotten impeached twice if his party had held the House in the 2018 midterms. The point is that midterms are very, very important in terms of making sure that there's accountability both, in Congress, but also at the presidential level. Typically, these are seen as like barometer elections just to see how well a president is doing, how well the country is responding. Typically, just, by happenstance, by nature, the president's opposition party does kind of flip and gain power. I feel like that's just a, natural thing, whether a president is good or bad, just based off of political polarization, that just happens. But midterms are typically seen as a thermostatic voting opportunity, which means that the public is able to express negative feedback to government policy and send a message on, a party's success or failures in setting and accomplishing agenda goals. This has especially been seen in the last three first-term presidential midterms. All have resulted in a party flip of the House. This can be characterized as retrospective voting, as the voters look back over the past 2 years to determine if the incumbent party that holds the executive branch is doing a noteworthy job or not. So one reason why Democrats were able to sweep many House elections in 2018 was the diminished incumbent advantage for many of the open seats. 44 Republicans had announced that they were retiring their offices, their seats, in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency. With no incumbent running in the race, and a GOP trifecta in presidency, Democrats were able to win a majority in the House. For the 2022 midterms, the Biden presidency has a Democratic trifecta, and people predict that quite a political tilt toward the GOP will happen during the elections, for many of the House and Senate elections, I guess I should say. But contrary to many other past midterm elections, polarization of ideology in America has greatly split the electorate. I think to a point where now there's much more independence, to be honest, with people just being, fed up of fringe political rhetoric and communications. Um, while many are politically identifying as diehard partisans, the independent center of the political spectrum is increasingly getting larger. There are more swing voters and competitive races that make pre-election polling not necessarily as accurate as we would like. For most of the candidates, this has resulted in a strong yet very expensive effort to campaign to constituents. Ads and campaigning is now more expensive than ever with various forms of media at one's disposal. There is an observable trend in recent elections that is also worth noting. I particularly like to talk about it because I've actually done research on this topic. It is the coattails effect. It's not just specific to midterms. In fact, it's typically more so seen in general elections with presidential candidates. For example, Obama's sizable victory in the Democratic Party in 2008 led to a very renewed focus on this political phenomenon of the coattails effect. It comes from the idiom riding on one's coattails, and it refers to the assertion of like one's own merit as a politician uh, in abundance, in excess, and it kind of diffuses out to other people and other like related events. So political scientists have applied this phrase, this turn of phrase to the scenario of a very successful candidate and their presence on the ballot uplifting lower tier candidates on down ballot races. In 2018, there was a good example of this. Democratic candidate for Texas, the Texas Senate race, Beto O'Rourke, lost his election very narrowly, though, for Texas. For a Democrat to do that well, it was kind of unheard of. But he was running against incumbent Ted Cruz, but his being on the ballot brought out a lot of Democrats. Sure enough, not enough to get him elected, but it did support other down ballot candidates. Beto O'Rourke's near miss candidacy flipped 11 Texas House seats, filled one vacancy with a Democrat, and flipped 2 Texas Senate seats, and propelled 2 other U.S. House candidates to Capitol Hill for the Democratic Party. Even further, Beto O'Rourke whittled away at a very, very, very significant lead that the Republican candidate Ted Cruz enjoyed just 4 years prior in the other midterm of 2014. This example just goes to show that candidates can successfully ride on the coattails of an unsuccessful candidate if the race is, nationalized enough. So to wrap up, elections are very, very dynamic mechanisms that uphold democracy by keeping our representatives accountable to the will of the people. Elections can be, for elected officials, policies, propositions. There's a few on the California ballot right now. Just 1 year ago, we had a very expensive recall election in California that, in a sense, changed nothing about our government, but it was to the tune of $275 million. The point is that we need to treat elections, very seriously. We need to make sure that there is big turnout. We need to make sure that we are using elections effectively because, again, to go along with the car analogy, elections are essentially us fine-tuning our government. We are making sure that our government and our democracy runs smoothly like we would expect our car to. Midterms are very, very, very dependent on turnout, and typically they have very low turnout because it's, not during a presidential year. People care about the president. People don't really care about anything that is not the president. Of course, now that's kind of changing as we're able to, employ different marketing and different communications to educate voters on the importance of elections and especially midterms. But the best way to do this is to just go out and vote, to tell other people within your friend groups, within your family to vote. That's the best thing that you can do for government. And with that, that is the end of our discussion. Definitely a very, important topic for this time, and I'm sure it's going to be an important topic moving forward, just in terms of our lives and how important elections are now. But I'll leave you with the message of please go out and vote. Election day is coming up, or maybe by the time this video is out, it'll be, today. But definitely make sure that you vote. Check any, local registrar of voters in order to make sure that you are voting correctly and, where to go, have a voting plan, and yeah, just contribute more to democracy as a car. Thanks.